This past week, we saw the Major League Baseball trade deadline come and go, and there were a lot of mistakes. The Dodgers missing out on Randy Arozarena. Garrett Crochet's management announcing that a extension had to be done if you wanted him to pitch through the postseason. We had teams overpaying. We had teams not getting enough back. Leave your comments down below, especially if you think your team made a mistake. What was it? And if you think your team did wonderfully, what happened around the league that you think is going to be a mistake and could come back and haunt a certain team or maybe your team? Let's start with the Garrett Crochet situation again. His management came out and said he's going to remain a starting pitcher the rest of the way. That's the best thing for him. And if you want him through the postseason, you have to get that extension done. And that essentially nuked any chances of him getting dealt. And with some of the quotes that we're getting now, doesn't sound like he's too happy to still be there. So why was it made public in the first place? This was a mistake by Crochet's management on an epic level. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's now some bad blood between the player and the front office, or at least that player's management and the front office. And you wonder if other front offices see that and they're thinking, his agent is a problem. That's not something we're interested in. You're thinking about value with Garrett Crochet at this point, and it is as high as it's ever going to be. He could start to struggle. He could get injured, or just in general, you're going to get less time with him if a trade is executed in the offseason or at next year's deadline. This was the time to trade him. Chris Getz couldn't do it because his value was thrown completely off by the necessity of an extension. Part of that value is that it's team control, and it's cheap team control, not a long contract that you're going to regret at a higher dollar. So this, by his management, killed any chances of a trade. We also had two teams, the Angels and the Rockies, teams that are going nowhere anytime soon, decide to hold on to pieces that should have been traded. The Rockies holding on to Elias Diaz, who's going to be a free agent, and Cal Quantrill, who is in year 2 of 3 of his arbitration, and Ryan McMahon, who is also in year 2 or 3 of his arbitration. The Angels holding on to Rengifo in his second year of arbitration, Kevin Pillar, who's going to be a free agent, and Tyler Anderson, who has one more year under contract at $13 million. These were all players that should have been dealt. All 6 of them should be wearing different uniforms today, because these teams are going to lose next year and probably the year after that as well. And at that point, all these guys are going to be gone. So you held on to them for nothing to trade them down the road when their value will be lower. This was a bad job by the Angels front office. They traded some relievers, but they needed to go farther. They needed to do more. They could have more prospects today to help them next year or the year after that. And they don't. And especially after what they did last year at the deadline, when they traded a bunch of prospects and then waived them at the end of August, you need to do everything you can to try to rebolster that farm system. Bad job by the Angels and bad job by the Rockies, who seem to keep doing this. They didn't trade Trevor Story when they should have traded him. They didn't trade John Gray when they should have traded him. This team, and I'm putting it on the ownership, because the front office, the general manager, there has been personnel changes, and these problems keep happening under the ownership's watch. So it's got to be on the owner. All right, let's keep going here, and we've got the Washington Nationals, who also held on to Kyle Finnegan. Kyle Finnegan is in year 2 of 3 for arbitration. The Nats will be an interesting team next year, but they're not going to be a good enough team to hold on to Kyle Finnegan right now, especially when the market for relievers was as strong as it was. They should have dealt Finnegan. Mike Rizzo generally does everything right. In this instance, I think he made a mistake, had a very high asking price, should have come down off of it. Also, talk about asking prices. The asking price for Yusei Kikuchi was through the moon, and the Astros paid it. I cannot believe that it was Blas, Loperfido, and Wagner, all 3 that went for Yusei Kikuchi. The deal that the Dodgers executed for Jack Flaherty, a better pitcher, wasn't this much. Houston Astros with a big mistake here, and this ended up being the only move. Really? The Astros couldn't go and grab Josh Bell for cash? That's all it took for Arizona. You couldn't go and trade for Yandy Diaz. That would have upgraded your team considerably. Bad job. Big mistake by the Houston Astros pulling this trade off and not trading for a first baseman. Speaking of teams that only made one move, the Minnesota Twins trading for Trevor Richards. Coming into the deadline, the Minnesota Twins had 4 relievers inside that circle of trust that you can throw out there and you feel comfortable with. After the deadline, they still only have 4 relievers inside that circle of trust. Okay, let's get to one of the teams from the thumbnail, and that's the San Diego Padres. I do believe it was a mistake to overpay twice for relief pitching. Jason Adam, Tanner Scott, if you want to overpay for one of them, okay. Doing it twice is a problem. It's going to cost you down the road. They ended up dealing a significant portion of their top 10 prospects to get 2 relievers. One of them is a rental. That was a mistake by the San Diego Padres. There are countless other relievers they could have gotten for less and still revamped and bolstered the bullpen. Pick one. Overpay for one of them. You can't overpay for both. It was a mistake. From overpaying to underwhelming returns, and that's where we are with the Chicago White Sox. Tommy Pham, Eric Fedde, Michael Kopech, we knew they were all moving. Pham was one of the more coveted bats. Fedde was one of the most coveted arms, especially with another year of control. And in the end, they really didn't get much back. They got Vargas, Perez, Albertus, and a player to be named later. I feel like Eric Fedde all alone could have brought 3 prospects in return, especially look at what the Yusei Kikuchi deal was. Fedde's a better pitcher, and there's another year of control. So not a good job by Chris Getz. I don't know if it was because it was a 3-team trade and he got confused about what pieces were moving around and what he was getting and what he was giving up. I don't know, but there was not enough back in return. I think if he had traded them all individually, it would have brought back a better return. Let's go to the Boston Red Sox. Talking about underwhelming, the only starting pitcher they added, and this was really the area of need. They did add 2 relief pitchers. That's good, but the bigger need, the stronger need, was in the rotation, and James Paxton was it. They needed to add a more significant piece to this rotation. They didn't do it. James Paxton barely, if at all, moves the floor. The big one is obviously the fact that the Dodgers missed out on Randy Arozarena. This was one of the no-brainer, must-happen moves of the deadline, and the Seattle Mariners swooped in and stole them for a package of players that the Dodgers very easily could have matched or exceeded. Randy would have been perfect in LA. The October element to him, the postseason clutch bat that he has a reputation for, is what the Dodgers needed, and they didn't get him. And Randy would have then been in that outfield equation for the next 2 years beyond this year. So when Teoscar Hernandez is a free agent and Teoscar wants too much money to be back, you can tell Teoscar to go pound sand because you traded for Randy Arozarena. In the end, they didn't do that. So they will be in an interesting position this winter as well when they're trying to put the pieces together for their outfield in 2025. This would have killed 2 birds with one stone. This would have killed 3 birds with one stone. It would have been a ricochet domino effect of birds just falling everywhere. Should have traded for Randy. It's a big mistake. The other mistake, San Francisco Giants. This team, instead of going into a buying mode or even a selling mode, they went into a salary dump mode. And in the end, I believe that will cost them a playoff spot. And if we're going to be taking away from the team and hurting our chances of making the playoffs, then why are we holding on to players like Blake Snell if we're going to, again, reduce our chances of making the playoffs, which I believe this does? You could be building one of the best rotations in the National League the rest of the way with Snell and Ray and Webb and Cobb and Harrison. There's no Cobb now. Although Soler has not been maybe the bat you thought he was still a bat that's going to go help the Braves that you don't have now. You got a couple guys that you're waiting to come back from injury. You're taking a guy out of the equation that's there right now and could help you. Again, what do you believe were the biggest mistakes from Tuesday's trade deadline? There were a lot of them. Did your team make one of them? Comment down below. Let me and the rest of the community know. That's going to do it for this one, everybody. I do appreciate you coming in and spending time with the channel, making it all the way to the end. It does amazing things for the algorithm, so thank you for that. I salute you, all of you that made it to the end. As always, remember, if it's low, let it go, and if it's high, let it fly. I'll catch you next time.